The Secret Science at Work by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 15. The Problem of the Unanswered Prayers. It must be said that from the very first, we were made aware often of the individual HRAs who were unable to contact their high selves, and that often no results were obtained through the efforts to use the Huna method of making the prayers. Also, there were the failures of the TMHG work to be considered. In the first place, we must acknowledge the fact that some people are so constituted that they will try a method for a little while, then lose interest and drift on to something else. There are others who just cannot find the time to train the low self, or even to get the right attitude of mind and accumulate the surcharge of mana before they pray. Then there are those who want someone from outside themselves to perform a miracle for them, and immediately with no work on their own part. But with all such accounted for, there is still the problem of the people who try earnestly and sincerely, those whose need is so urgent that they can and they do find time to pray, but who cannot seem to reach their high selves. In my book, with which all the HRAs were familiar, I had reported the observed prayer actions of Kahunas, which achieved such amazing results. I told how they went about healing work by helping their patients to get rid of feelings of guilt, requiring them to make amends, how they helped to remove the things which were blocking the path and eating inside, and then, if present, any spirits who had been exerting influence in the life of the one to whom they had attached themselves. Also, they dealt with spirits who had not attached themselves to the patient, but who periodically did things to cause them trouble, usually in an effort to avenge loved ones who had been hurt by the one attacked. I told of the mana surcharge taken on until it was so large and strong that it could be used by the Kahunas, much as the modern shock treatment to dislodge obsessing entities. Okay, let me read that sentence again. I told of the mana surcharge taken on until it was so large and strong that it could be used by the Kahuna, much as the modern shock treatment to dislodge obsessing entities. I told of a super mesmeric use of the same power to administer suggestion with the aid of a physical stimulus to make the suggestion even more powerful and to force its acceptance by the low self. These were the methods, but we found it difficult to learn to do as the Kahunas had done. The best Kahunas were trained psychics who could sense spirits causing trouble. We could not. The use of suggestion was looked upon by some with natural suspicion, and an attempt to interest the group in 18 hypnotists in experimenting with the mana shock method proved useless. Also, it was not revealed just as to what steps Kahunas took to remove complexes, though their root words and symbols showed a deep knowledge of the presence of these troublemaking things in the low self. The reader will probably read all the way through this report before pausing to see whether or not he can use the Huna prayer method as it has been explained. However, it should be said here that the only way to find out whether or not one can use the method or whether there is a blocked path to the high self is to try, to take the steps, the training steps, to see whether or not answers are obtained to the prayers which are correctly and carefully made. If answers are not forthcoming, the next step to be taken will be found in the following section of the report. If one inspects the first and earliest religious writings, it will be found that back in the dim beginnings of history, men had begun to pray and were already wondering why prayers were sometimes answered and sometimes not. The Bible is especially valuable in this respect, as it is filled with passages relating to prayer and the methods of making prayers. In the ancient religious literature of India, the problem was not set forth as clearly because the doctrine of karma more or less forced the people to believe that it was better to suffer and so to repay or wear out their karmic debts than to try to get help from the gods through prayer for things that had caused them to suffer. Propitiation of the gods was, of course, as old as the concept of gods or superphysical beings. Sacrifice was the most common rite of propitiation, and next came penance and self-punishment for acts classed as sins against the gods. Self-torture, wearing hair shirts, self-mutilation, fasting, and vows of silence or abstinence were all part of the efforts. Certain men came to be the ones to officiate at all sacrificial rites, and gradually they appear in the passages of history as a class apart, the priestly class. They and they alone were supposed to be able to tell whether or not the gods were angry or pleased. They soon arrogated to themselves the right to administer or grant forgiveness for sin as directed and authorized agents of the gods. Even today, this office is administered for the supreme God. The scapegoat is no longer burdened with the sins of the people and driven into the wilderness. The slaughter of animals on the altar, the sprinkling of the congregation, and temple furnishings with the blood and the burning of the flesh, all these things have passed for the most part. But still, it is the outer meaning of religions which has been preserved. The inner meaning has long been lost from these religions of old, into which Huna has been introduced as a secret body of knowledge. In modern times, much has been done to try to get away from the savage rites and concepts and the priestly arrogations of divine privilege. And many theories have been offered which run all the way from a complete denial of all material reality, including sin, to the expanding of the idea of God to one in which deity is vast impersonality. Deity is vast impersonality. Capital D, capital V, capital I. Today, as in Christianity, at the time of its inception, the most widely accepted explanations of why prayers are not answered is that the one making the prayer is not deserving of an answer. Sin, S-I-N, is thought to be the thing that makes one undeserving. The standard steps to get cleansed of sin and to become worthy of having prayers answered may be set down as follows. 1. Stop sinning. 2. Make amends for sins committed. 3. Ask forgiveness and hope to receive it. These 3 steps have been followed with care for up to 20 centuries, and still, prayers are all too often left unanswered. This has been painfully true despite the doctrine of the vicarious atonement, which, if accepted as applicable to the individual for his own cleansing, is thought to make amends for any and all sins. Obviously, something is missing. It has been long suspected by students of religion that something must be very wrong with our understanding of what was taught in both the Old Testament and the New, insofar as prayer and its frequent failure are concerned, and this includes our understanding of sin, amends, atonement, purification, prayers for forgiveness, and such rites as baptism, conversion, the confessional, and so forth. We have to go to Huna for for the correct concept of sin, and then we find that sin is basically not just breaking a law proclaimed by some prophet as having been laid down by God through the Ten Commandments, though the Ten Commandments were necessary social laws for a primitive people, providing a moral basis for life, and stand today as still basically useful. Sin is much more than that. It is far wider, deeper, and broader. Sin, as we find through Huna, anything that is bad for the human being or his fellows. To hurt others is a sin, not only physical murder, but hurting others mentally and emotionally is a sin. To hurt God is impossible. Man is too weak and small to do this, and breaking a man-made law of God means nothing if it hurts no one. But anything that prevents the low self from acting to make contact along the Aka cord with the high self and delivering the prayer is bad, because it cuts off from God, because it cuts man off from God, cuts the low and middle selves off from the high self, breaks up the team of the three selves, makes the entire life less than normal, and prevents the high self from helping the low pair of selves. In brackets, as has been stated before, the high self seems pledged to allow the lower pair their use of free will to a large extent, to permit them to blunder and stumble and suffer and sicken in order to learn by experience. The bad, B-A-D, done, which is of such a nature that it hurts others, may be reclassified according to Huna as, number 1, the sin of bad done others by malicious intent, and with full knowledge that it is bad, but nevertheless with a sense of guilt and resultant twinge of conscience. This will cause the low self of the sinner to flee from the face of God as a child flees from a parent when it deserves punishment and fears it will be given. A low self filled with guilt, shame, or fear will not make contact with the high self or try to send a prayer by way of the Aka cord. Number 2, the naturally bad person who hurts others maliciously, but who feels justified in doing so, and who suffers no sense of guilt or shame, but feels triumphant and worthy of praise for having overcome others, will not have his low self refuse to make the contact with the high self, nor will his high self cut him off. His prayer for help in the good things he may do will be answered. God is no respecter of persons, and in this case the wicked flourish as the green bay tree for a time, but their punishment comes in the form of the slowing down of their evolution upward. This will seem very hard for many to reconcile with the justice of God in quotes. But one has only to look around to see the wicked prosper and suffer no twinge or remorse or shame. One's sense of affronted justice can only be healed by realizing that our concept of sin must be changed from all the customary beliefs and made to rest on one test alone. Does the act cause an individual to be cut off by his low self from his high self? If it does not, he has not sinned under the classification which we are forced to consider in order to understand why prayers are not answered. If all rests on and revolves around the question of what may or may not cause the low self to refuse to contact the high self, the matter of justice, human or divine, or of karma or ultimate retribution has no part in the premise from which we approach the problem of the unanswered prayer. Once this point of view can be accepted as a fact, or even as an assumption, while leaving the matter of justice entirely out of the picture for the time being, one can go on to look into the things that prevent the low self from doing its part in prayer, the things which are quite apart from the kind of bad acts which we have noted above. The low self is affected by only two things. Number one, what it senses at the moment with the five senses, as what it sees, hears, feels, painful, fearful, good, bad, or pleasant impressions. Number two, what it remembers of the times or events in the past when it has registered events or happenings, and has remembered or registered by making thought form clusters with which to record and remember. This brings us into two kinds of memory. The one made in the normal and natural way has, as a part of it, the meaning of rationalization of the event and its relation to all previous events of which the man has knowledge, or which he anticipates, fears, or hopes to see develop. All memory thought form clusters are, as made, connected with all other memories which are recalled during the process of deciding what they mean in relation to all things formerly experienced, read about, imagined, or otherwise touched upon. As indicated in the translation of their ancient words, the Kahunas used the symbol of the spider's web with flies caught in it. Each fly was a memory, and all flies were connected by the strands of the web with all other flies. In the center lay the spider, the man made of low and middle selves, aware of the presence of each fly and able to run out to inspect it at any time. The thin strands of web stood for the aka thread, and the normal memory was one tied to all other memories in a rationalization process as it was made, thought over, and considered. This in turn brings us to another kind of memory, which is made and stored without being rationalized. This set of thought forms will not be tied correctly with the other thought forms, and because the middle self did not do its part and rationalize the memory as it was being made, the middle self never has that particular memory given back to it as one recalled. It is an outlaw memory. It is deformed. It is something that low self knows is not normal and not right, and of which it is ashamed or afraid. A low self which harbors a sense of guilt because of bad deeds done by the lower middle self will not face the high self across the aka cord. In exactly the same way, it will not face the middle self with the shame of an unrationalized memory weighing it down, making it feel that it has dirty hands, and that it must hide the black thing at all costs. In this trait, the low self is more stubborn and obstinate than can be imagined. It hides these outlaw memories like a crafty criminal his loot, and like the criminal, it crouches hidden from the middle self at night when the middle self sleeps and considers its ill-gotten loot, sorting it and trying to rationalize it in its own illogical fashion. The result of this effort to put right the outlaw memory results in a worsening condition. In the hiding of the back sack, in quotes, back sack, where it keeps its loot, the low self works and compares and comes to all kinds of illogical and irrational conclusions. The remaining power used by the middle self is impossible to the low self. One outlaw memory cluster may slowly be tied by the low self using aka threads to several other chains linked or connected normal and rational thought form clusters which register the memory and meanings of events. As a result, the individual, although the middle self can recall none of the unrationalized memories, will seem automatically to react to certain events, thus connected with the outlaw memory, as if he were slightly demented. He may react in any or all of several ways. Okay, number 1. He may fly into a rage, or may be filled with unreasonable fear, or some other form of emotion which suddenly seems to well up from inside him and be too strong to control. Number 2. He may be unable to think normally, rationally, or at that usual speed when some event which is tied to the outlaw is confronted. He may find a blank in his memories right there, even to the degree of amnesia. Number 3. He may suddenly imagine things to be entirely different than they actually are. He may imagine a friend as an enemy, or almost anything at all. He may imagine that he himself is vastly superior all of a sudden, or that he is put upon or that he is so put upon that his very life is a continuing misery. Number 4, he may react physically, jerking, trembling, become hysterical, or paralyzed, or blind, or deaf and dumb for a short period of time, or for a long period. Number 5, he may show no outward reaction, such as these, but may develop physical ills of all sorts, in brackets. Physicians now know that a large part of human sickness comes as a result of involvement to a greater or lesser degree with this trouble which we are discussing. Close bracket. In addition to the abnormalities in reactions to events physically, mentally, emotionally, or in matters of health, there is one other very important factor to be kept in mind at all times. This is the fact that there is, tied up with each memory cluster, a certain something that gauges the amount of mana which will be automatically used or exploded when that particular memory cluster is touched or activated by some circumstance. Most memories arouse almost no emotion on the part of the low self, and so use up almost no mana as they are recalled. Emotion uses up mana faster by far than anything else. All of us have witnessed the effect of an emotional storm which has depleted the vital force, sometimes even to the point of physical collapse. If an outlaw memory has been made by some event which caused the low self to get out of hand because of anger, fear, grief, or hate, almost the same very large amount of mana is used in the original emotional explosion will be recalled and used in the memory as the memory is triggered. If the middle self was unable to function when the original emotion caused the low self to grab the bit, so to speak, and bolt with the man, leaving all reason behind and out of the picture, the same thing will happen on a slightly lesser scale when the memory is activated. Because of this waste of mana, the individual whose low self may be inwardly seething with outlaw memories, all tied together in a wide tangle, may find himself chronically exhausted and ill. We all know the bedeviled persons who are constantly expressing their hates and fears and black suspicions which are irrational for the most part, but to which they cling despite all argument, desperately and almost insanely. As a matter of fact, such persons are psychotic or neurotic to the extent to which these outlaw memories tangle these outlaw memory tangles afflict them. As a matter of fact, such persons are psychotic or neurotic to the extent to which these outlaw memory tangles afflict them. A person who is only slightly burdened with outlaw memories is able to go through life fairly well. Most of us are entirely unaware that we have these burdensome memories, and in no way do we suspect that our physical ills, our bad luck, our angers, hates, and illogical set ideas and beliefs are caused in any way by the outlaw memory clusters. Least of all do we suspect of them being the cause of the failure of our prayers. Unfortunately, most of us are unaware that the lesser mental troubles are caused by the outlaws. We decide only when things become serious that we are suffering from some mental illness, and we go to a doctor who sends us to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. One greatly burdened in this way tends to tie up and to use up more and more precious mana in reacting to the outlaw memories. And as the mana level sinks, the middle self loses its control over the low self. The mental illness may become so marked that the person must be placed in a mental hospital for treatment. The Kahunas had 3 words for the 3 levels of the state of severance from the high self, which was caused by the low self when it harbored deep feelings of guilt, shame, or fear, or heavy loads of outlaw memory tangles. These words were, number 1, I-N-O. I know? It's spelled I-N-O. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. And then it says, to hurt others, to be wicked and bad willfully. Number 2, Hala, H-A-L-A, to have a normal number of outlaw memory tangles, so that only a part of our actions or reactions are off normal. This word also means to miss the path one should take. This path is the Aka chord, and to miss it is to have the low self refuse to send the prayer to the high self. It is to miss the mark in trying to hit the thing aimed at. And then in brackets here it says, check the New Testament. Quote, miss the mark of the high calling, end quote, in which the calling is the prayer to the high self. Close bracket. Number 3. Hua. I don't know how to pronounce it again. Okay, I'm going to spell it now. H-E-W-A. To make a mistake, to think or act or react wrongly, to be mentally deranged to some extent, to forget. Also, this word has the meaning of missing the right path, as has the word hala. The symbol words used by the Kahunas to indicate this thing that cuts one off from the high self, this unrationalized memory, tangled with its many Aka threads, appear all through the Bible. Here are some of them. Thorns, thistles, open bracket, the cursed things God caused to grow in the soil, which Adam was forced to till after being driven from the garden because of his sins. So, thorns, thistles, the dragon, the serpent, any ferocious wild beast, particularly a lion, a snare, which is made of thread, cord, or rope, symbolic of the Aka thread, and the tangle of the outlaw memories, which tempt or capture or otherwise hold one captive. A stumbling block of any kind, a cross of any shape. All these symbolize the fixations and obsessions, the outlies which trip us up. If there are many outlaw memories, they will block the path, or way, or road, or highway. Open bracket. A straight path, or a straight or stretched cord, is the symbol of the open path, while a crooked path or a tangled cord, one not pulled tight, is the symbol of the Aka cord, which is entirely or partly blocked, or which the low self will activate only at rare intervals to send a prayer to the high self on the command of the middle self. Close bracket. The Kahunas used a wooden cross in the form of an X on the path leading to the temple. It was the sign of taboo in Huna. The temple itself signified the place of the Most High. The cross placed on the path was a warning that the uncleansed must not proceed. Later we shall take up the symbology of another form of cross. Dust or fine particles of dirt symbolize the thought forms as well as do seeds, as mentioned before. In the case of the outlaw memories, these fine particles of dirt are looked upon as something that makes one unclean, which soil our hands, especially our feet. One needs to be cleansed of them before being fit to face the high self by way of the low self in the action of making the Huna type prayer. A net of any kind is a symbol often used because of the intermeshing of the cords as between associated memories, and at times the fish caught in the net represent the memories which have become entangled and removed from their normal state. The fish are especially good symbolically because they are usually hidden and are hard to find and catch. Moreover, when brought to the surface and deprived of water, in brackets mana, they are killed, in brackets rationalized, or rethought, and made harmless. The mana, which is tied up with the defective memories, is symbolized by ice, or snow, or cold. It is frozen water, and is as set and fixed, so cannot flow symbolically, as are the beliefs and ideas contained in defective memories, the latter being held to stubbornly by the affected low self, despite all arguments presented by the middle self or by others. Trembling, shivering, shaking with fear, therefore, are symbols of the mana and the memory tangles which hold the man captive. Fear of the Lord causes the low self to try to escape parental judgment by refusing to go before the face of the Lord or the high self, and fear and guilt and shame interlace so that one interchanges with another. In short, what can prevent our prayers from being answered is the unrationalized memory, which we have learned to call complex or fixation. It is also the guilt sense caused by having committed the sin of hurting others. We can stop hurting others and make amends for hurts already done. That is comparatively simple for most of us because we live fairly hurtless and helpful lives. To get the memory tangles to the surface and to rationalize them, that is the major problem. And that concludes chapter 15. Chapter 16 is called The Problem of the Blocked Path.